Well, I want to welcome you to my channel. My name is Dale, and the channel is called Observer of Anomalous Objects. And so I want to welcome you and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at. I know we have some people watching from Australia. I know we'll have some people watching from the UK. And so I just want to welcome you to the podcast. I'm excited because today we're going to have Earl Grey Anderson. And I'm telling you what, you are in for a delight today. And with no further ado, let me go ahead and bring the man of the hour up. This Earl Grey Anderson.
Well, that was no preamble there. Yeah. How are you doing there,
me.
Dale?
That's not me. I'm short and to the point usually.
But so we've got listeners in Australia over the pond, huh? I've been there, my wife and I, about 14 years ago. It's been a while now, but made quite the impression on me. Beautiful country, and I'll tell you, the phenomenon is active there. It's a big country. It's as big as the United States, but a lot of that area is just taken up, the people that traverse through the outback, and a lot of it, we complain about heat here. Well, there it's like a furnace, flying over Australia. You get to the Red Center area, it looks like Mars. But really? Interestingly enough, the Aboriginal folks, they know how to navigate all of that. And they have a story that goes back that they talk about Lightning Man. That was their Prometheus coming down from the sky. This is like 40,000 years ago, they say. And he brought civilization, he brought language and hunting skills, and taught them how to navigate through this great wilderness. And they still do it today. It's quite amazing. So, but anyway, I have a love for Australia personally, and lots of friends in the UK too. So, hello, Mike.
Several of them watching. Whether they're going to be live or not, it's a different story. But we have several that will be watching it. UAP Down Under is one of them. Nordic Queen is another. My Left Testy is another one. Has something to do with a video game or something like that. But so and then we have several people from the UK. Got Jedi, who's a good friend of mine.
Well, now I write a regular column for Outer Limits magazine. If you're in the UK, it's a wonderful, wonderful UFO magazine. It's online, but. Anyway, if you go to Outer Limits magazine, Google that, it'll pop up. And I've been writing a regular column for the last 5 years or so for them. So there you go.
Well, Earl, why don't you start telling us about, how you got to where you are today? Where does it begin at? Where does the story begin?
Sure. Well, my life, it's I can't remember a time in my life where I didn't know that that we weren't alone. It seems like that information was kind of born in me for some reason. Earliest memories are climbing up the swing set in the backyard. My dad built out of wood. He was sort of a carpenter type. And I'd go up on the monkey bars and I'd be waving and singing at the sky. Well, I remember my mother opening up the kitchen window and going, "Who are you waving and singing to, Earl?" And without even thinking about it, I just said, "I'm waving and singing to the space people, Mom, the space people." And I think that she noticed this about me. My comfort zone, a lot of kids will do this. They'll kind of take books and put them around themselves like a castle and create that safe space where you play with your, army men or your Barbies if you're a girl or whatever, you've got that safe space that you build. And for myself, that safe space would be, we had the Time Life encyclopedias that we had gotten. And they had this was, 1963, 62. It was the beginning of the space race that we had. A lot of pages in those encyclopedias were devoted to the early rocketry program, the Redstone rocket program, which my mom apparently was involved in. So I think she took note of that. And I would do silly things like create like a little paper control panel and put it up on my bedroom wall that was the controls to my spaceship. And she, I think, noticed this. So I have this memory that's just diamond sharp. It was from 1963. I was 5 years old, living in Venice, California, getting ready to go to kindergarten that day. It was a school day, sitting down for my cornflakes or frosted flakes. I had my bowl there, and my mom sat down across from me, and she starts talking to me in a very strange way. There was no baby talk involved. She began talking to me like I was another, like a peer, like I was another adult. It caught my attention. She didn't usually talk like that. But I think that her history was weighing on her. I think perhaps she missed her old job. She had tried to become a housewife. Later on in the 1970s, she went back into working for the aerospace industries. But she was trying to be a housewife, and I think that it weighed on her. And she sat down and she started talking to me. She said, "Well, son, you know that it's no secret. Everybody in the family and friends, they all know that I worked for Howard Hughes," which she did. She worked for Hughes Aircraft, and she was one of Howard Hughes's two personal secretaries that worked in the aircraft division. He had like a Hollywood division. He had the oil, drill bit division, where he made his fortune. He made his fortune through, designing a better drill bit for the oil fields, and kind of opened up that whole industry for us. But she worked for the early aerospace program that he had his hand in, and that was his great love. You can watch the film The Aviator. It's quite accurate. So my mom worked for him in the 1950s, and she said, "Well, son, everybody knows about this, and you're my best friend Ellen, who we called Aunt Ellen. She worked for the Rand Corporation, which was part of Hughes back then. They later on became their own, their own industry, but at that point, the two were connected." She said, "Well, son, I had a very weird thing about my job." And she just started telling me this account. She said, "They took me out with a little security detail, a couple of security guys, to the very middle of the Great American Desert. And it was the middle of nowhere." She said, I didn't know why they took me there. There was no preamble to it. They didn't give me any idea of where they were taking me or why. And the only thing I could see other than the desert floor was this low-slung shack. It was this concrete, like a bunker. And she wondered if they were taking her out to see a tractor or tools. I mean, it just, she had no idea why she was there. Well, they unlocked this thing, and she said the only thing that was in there was an elevator. And it didn't go up. There was no up floor. So I knew I was going downstairs in an elevator. I thought maybe it was a floor or two. I didn't know. She said that the elevator doors closed and it started up and it was going really fast. She said it was quite a clip. I felt butterflies in my stomach and it scared me. You can imagine, this is mid-1950s. And she said that she had to kind of catch her balance, and that the doors opened up and that there was a little bustling city under the desert. And those were her words. She said it was a mile under the desert and there was a little city down there. She said that there were a lot of scientists that were working on top secret projects. A lot of German rocket scientists were working there. Later on, she actually mentioned Werner von Braun by name. He came up on Disney, and she pointed at the screen and she said, "Son, that's my old friend Werner. I used to work with him. He called me Betty Grace." And that was her first and her middle name. My mom's maiden name was Maiden, which is still, I get a laugh from Social Security people or something. Your mother's maiden name, Betty Grace Maiden, But anyway, she knew Werner von Braun, and she said, "Well, this city under the desert, people would stay there long periods of time, and they tried to make people feel comfortable." She said that there were little cafes that they had down there. She said that they had a movie theater, that there was a barber shop, but the barber knew how to do my hair. She used to get her hair permed. Here's a old photo of my mom from around that time.
So
And
was this,
yeah, she had kind of a perm that she would get.
so was this a
It didn't
government
mean a lot to me.
was this a government facility, or was this owned by Howard Hughes?
You know, I my feeling is it was probably privately owned, but that it was. I've spoken with a few people. There's one expert on underground bases who I spoke with. His name will come to me in a second, but he told me that Howard Hughes actually had the first privately owned lab over at Area 51. And he
Well,
said
that's
that there were
wonderful.
some blueprints that had been, you know, released through FOIA requests and stuff that showed that. So he had his hand in that stuff. Now, I don't know that this is Area 51. A long time I sort of thought maybe it was, but now there's some other ideas. I've heard similar stories about a city under the desert that's in White Sands, for instance. One of my cases, the two brothers, dad took them to work, take your kids to work day, and work happened to be under the desert in this computer facility. But she didn't mention computers. She just mentioned rocket scientists and top secret programs. And she said that, she mentioned that she had a guy that could do her hair down, when she was at work. And I was thinking later on, she must have been spending some time down there. You don't go, under the desert in the middle of nowhere just to get your hair done. So, but, my mom a lot of the details she didn't share with me, just that there was a city under the desert that she worked for Howard Hughes at. And the way that she finished the conversation was, she said, "Well, son, I know that you're very, very interested in life in outer space. And I want you to know that we already know that we're not alone, that there actually is life in outer space. We've actually made contact." She said, "You'll hear about UFOs and all this stuff." And she said, "That really is true. But they're never going to tell people. They're never going to tell the public." And that was kind of the end of the conversation. I went and she dropped me off at kindergarten like usual, my little bag lunch, and kids that they can accept stuff like this. You don't really have your presuppositions set in stone. And as far as I knew, all the other kids had parents that worked in underground cities. I mean, I didn't know.
It was a norm.
Yeah. So, but this was a big question mark for me, because you'd turn on television and, if they're talking about space people, it'd be like My Favorite Martian was a sitcom at the time. You'd had The Great Gazoo on the Flintstones, even the Jetsons. I don't remember them having space people on the show. So it wasn't something that you heard about. This is before you really heard about the little gray aliens with the black eyes or any of that stuff. But the years went by, and there were a couple conversations I heard my mom have with her sister. She and her sister had an experience back in Muscatine, Iowa, when my mom was 16, where and I believe it was a visit from our friends. She always spoke of it as her ball lightning encounter, but ball lightning only lasts for 2 to 3 seconds, and it's not intelligent. She talked about how the sound, she was getting ready to go to sleep out on the screened-in porch because of the humidity. They'd sleep out there, and she got on her elbows, and this basketball-sized ball of sparks pushed its way through the screen, hovered over her younger sister, then came over and hovered in front of my mom, like eye-to-eye level if it had eyes. She said that this thing pushed its way back through the screen, and it headed out towards the neighbor's cornfield. My mom got up, put her robe around herself, and she ran after this. And it waited for her like a little puppy dog would wait for its owner. It was just hanging there over this cornfield, about 30 feet in the air. She said it waited for her, and she got there, and she was looking up at it, and it popped like a soap bubble. And you could smell electricity in the air when it popped. And so maybe, I think that maybe something, we find that this phenomenon seems to follow, bloodlines and families. And I believe that that was a contact incident that my mom had. And maybe they knew that she'd be working with this stuff later on. But after she told me her story, the years went by and I didn't really talk about it very much, just maybe among my cousins and myself. But in fourth grade, we had a show and tell day. It's a Friday. And it was, what do your parents do? It was usually the dad, we're talking 1968. Most of the moms were stay-at-home moms back in those days. Well, I talked about my dad's landscape contractor job, and they weren't very interested. The kids were kind of yawning. A lot of their dads were working on the Apollo program and stuff. We lived in Thousand Oaks, California at that point. And the way Thousand Oaks was positioned, it was close to all of the aerospace companies. You had Rocketdyne, Rockwell, you had General Dynamics, you had Northrop, you had Lockheed Skunk Works in Burbank. So the kids were bored. So I talked about my dad, and then I said, well, but let me tell you about my mom. And Dale, I told my fourth grade class what I just told you about, the underground city, and that we're not alone. We've already made contact. Yes. Well, the kids started kind of making fun of me. I was Spacey Earl, and they'd do the little, my favorite Martian antennae behind my head. I think the teacher was concerned. She was concerned that I was telling such stories. First of all, where did that come from? And concerned that the kids were kind of teasing me. So she scheduled a parent-teacher conference, and my mom went in. Didn't say what the conference was about. I didn't know what it was about, but I'm playing on the swing sets out there, recess area, probably waving at the space people, Well, my mom came out from the conference, and she looked very stern. She didn't say anything. We walked out to the car. She opened up the passenger door of our station wagon, and I'm getting into the passenger seat. My mom said, son, I want you to know I'm not angry at you. The first indication that something was not right. So she got into the car, and she's starting the car up, and she says, son, now I want to tell you, you didn't know that there was anything wrong with what you told your class, but you can't ever talk about this stuff again. And I still didn't know what she was talking about. She said, people don't know about little cities under the desert, and they certainly don't know about alien life and UFOs. It's not, people don't know about that. And I wasn't supposed to tell you. She said, that's top secret information, and your mother could get into horrible trouble. And she's trying to drive at this point. And she looked at me again, and she said, how did you remember that? You were just a baby. And I'm like, getting angry. I said, well, I wasn't a baby. I was 5, already going to school. She said, no, you were a baby. And I thought that you wouldn't have understood, or you would have forgotten about it. But you can't ever tell people about this again. Your mother could get in trouble. And then she looks at me and she said, I could go to prison if you talk about it. I signed stuff. So we go home, and I guess I went to my room, and I don't know, I thought about everything, and I never talked about it again publicly. I didn't, but around 1977, I didn't want my mom to go to prison. No. And she was very serious. She wasn't exaggerating anything. And I could tell. My mom wasn't somebody to tell crazy stories. And back in the 1970s, she went back to work as she actually worked for an employment agency. But the thing that was funny is all of her accounts were sort of like David Grush's litany of the gatekeepers of the information about ETs. Where it was getting people, scientists out to Northrop, Rockwell, Rocketdyne, all those companies. And she loved what she did. She had a gift at this, and she could read people. And I think they knew that. Apparently, she had already been read into these programs, so my mom was a convenient person to have doing that. They didn't have to read somebody else into all this stuff because they really compartmentalized this information. The people that I know now contemporaneously that are in this field, they only know a little tiny bit. They don't tell anybody the whole story. But I think that my mom maybe knew a lot more just because of the years that it was the height of the Cold War. Um, but I took her to see the movie Star Wars. Okay, this was 1977. It had only been out for about 3 days at that point. We went to a theater, and I think we might have been the only ones there. It was a matinee. That day, the story, and I know the date that this happened because I looked up the date that the Time magazine article came out about Star Wars. But anyway, the film ended and the curtains closed, and my mom started talking again. The first time since I was 5 years old. Uh, and she wasn't really holding anything back. She said, "Son, you have no idea how close to the truth that movie is. The different beings, the different spacecraft, all that." She said, "Star Wars is not far-fetched." And she kept going on, and I, even to where I felt uncomfortable about what she was telling me. A lot of it was news to me, and I asked her though. She said they're never going to tell the public. This is realer than you will ever know. And she actually used those words, realer than you will ever know, which I thought about that. I still think about that. And I asked her, I said, "Well, why the hell not? Why wouldn't they tell people? This is one of the most important questions that people have. Is there a God? What happens when we die? And are we alone in the universe?" And at that point, she brought up, she said they're afraid that people are going to react badly. She brought up Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast as an example. And she said, imagine the whole world reacting badly to finding out that we're not alone, and that, there's this advanced race. We're going to tell the public, son. That's just how it is. And that ate at me for many years. Now, I'd tried to get her to talk more as time went on, like the Bob Lazar story came out. And I mentioned him to my mom. And now at this point, my mom was sick. She had gotten cancer like 6 different times. Oh, no. The last time it took her life. I found out that through Richard Sauter. He's the author that's written quite a bit about underground bases, not really about UFOs so much, but he's an expert on our underground facilities. They call them DUMBs, Deep Underground Military Bases, is the acronym. And he said a lot of those people that worked in the early programs did get cancer, that a lot of them died from that. And he wasn't sure the reason why. Hypothetically, I think, it had a nuclear pile that they were running this thing off of. And I mean, if you're in close proximity to something like that, yeah, it's going to irradiate you. In fact, I asked my mom, maybe you should lawyer up. I mean, she was on her deathbed. She passed away a few weeks later. And I said, maybe we should get a lawyer and go after the government. People from Area 51 had just successfully sued the government for exposing them to harmful chemicals. And Mom wouldn't hear of it. She said, I knew there were risks when I joined. She said, but I'm a patriotic woman. I did it for my country to sue my government. And that was her final word on it. I asked her about Bob Lazar, and she made a joke out of it. It made her uncomfortable. I said, this guy sounds like one of your people that you'd send out to one of your clients, this Bob Lazar guy. And I sort of told her the, thumbnail sketch of his story. I remember she pulled her glasses down. I do that too. Pulled her glasses down, looked up at me and said, Bob Laser, that's not a real name. And she just shut the conversation down. Didn't want to talk about it. But she did she did reiterate her story about the city under the desert for a skeptic friend of mine. Um, he was visiting my mom. I mean, we kind of knew she wasn't going to be long for the world. This was 1999. Mom was 73 years old at that point, and she was dying from breast cancer, and she'd already had a double mastectomy. But that's what they called it. I mean, it just kept coming back, and it wasn't a metastasized cancer. The doctor said it's as if you were irradiated somehow. None of these seem to be linked to the other ones. You usually see, like, the cancer will spread, but these would start on their own. And but she did tell this story about the underground base to the skeptic friend of mine. I know he used to get the Skeptic magazine that was out. They still publish that. Mick West probably writes articles for him now. But she didn't want to tell details. She'd kept her. I know she kept her security clearances, and they were way the hell up there. My ex-mother-in-law was looking for a job with the FBI. It was a dream of hers, and she needed security clearance. And she asked me if my mom could help her do that. And I asked my mom, I just kind of flippantly asked her, could you get Pat a security clearance? She wants to work for the FBI. And she called up it was my ex-mother-in-law at that point too, but we stayed kind of friends. A week later, I get a phone call from her, and she says, "I want you to thank your mother for me. She did work it out that I could get security clearances, and guess what? I've got a job with the FBI." First thing I looked up was the JFK assassination. So that was my mom. She was very proud of what she did. She was a patriotic American, not a flag waver, but she was the real deal. And when she passed away, there was no chance of me finding out more about this phenomenon. And it, that question mark seemed to grow year by year. I mean, it felt like this 100-foot, golden question mark that I was carrying around over my head. So I started reading literature about the phenomenon. There were some good books, some not so good. They all usually contradicted each other on some level. It's like, well, none of these guys really, they don't have the golden ticket. It's hypothetical. What do I do? I really, really, really want to know. It's eating at me. Maybe the same way that it ate at my mom, that she had to keep her secret. And she told me she wasn't supposed to. The one name that kept coming up, Dale, from book to book to book, to case to case to case, was this organization called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. They used scientific principles in their investigations, and so I went. And I looked into MUFON, and I joined. I joined in 2014.
Okay.
And it was like putting a fish in water. I mean, this was what I was meant to do. And I guess I've been pretty successful at it. I'm on your show, and it seems like everybody wants to hear my story and hear about my casework and all that good stuff. But MUFON, as an organization, they started in 1969. The Air Force's first so-called transparency organization about the phenomena, Project Blue Book, they closed their doors in 1969, more or less saying, nothing to see here, folks. There's no evidence, and blah, blah, blah. The same stuff they're saying now. We just recently had the Aero congressional meetings. And I know a lot of the people that gave their accounts. Robert Solis, who was the commanding officer of ICBM facility, where all of his missiles were turned off by a UFO that had done an incursion on that base. Our most highly secretive base is. I mean, it happened to him. It actually happened at Minot Air Force Base as well. Two different occasions where there was an incursion of a UFO, shot some kind of a beam down into the underground facility. 8 to 10 missiles per case. It shut them down so thoroughly, they had to take those missiles out of the silos and completely rewire them. And yet the computer systems, the radio, the oxygen pumps, everything else was still working. Now, this is a level of witness that came forward recently, just a couple years ago, for the Arrow investigation. And Sean Kirkpatrick, who ran that whole thing, when they shut that down, he said, "There's no evidence and nothing to see here, folks." Just like Project Blue Book did in 1969. Nothing's changed. Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's Project Blue Book 2.0. It was 2.0. Yep. That's what it was. Then a lot of people feel like the reason it was created was to figure out who the whistleblowers were, who the leaks were coming from. So they, Congress is the one who created it, but then the government used that to kind of go and find out where the leaks were and try to plug them. And so it was never, a lot of people believe it was never about, transparency.
No. I think that there were some people that in Congress that were actually had the right motives. Chuck Schumer, you had, the gentleman from Florida. I think that, Rubio, Gillibrand, there were a lot of people that were truly interested in, like, this was something. Mm-hmm. And that there is no reason why the public shouldn't be read into this. I've been told that my mom's file is still sealed. The guy from the DOD got a hold of me out of the blue. He actually used Facebook, the messenger telephone, to get a hold of me. And his credentials were all spot on. The guy is a DOD person, and he told me, "I just want you to know, your mother didn't lie to you, and you can be very, very proud of your mother." I've read her file, and all I can say is you can be very proud of your mother. And I asked him, I said, "She has a file?" "Well, of course, I guess, if you read it, can you tell me any more?" And this gentleman, he said, "No, I can't. Your mother's file is sealed." Now, that file is back from, when she was working on these secretive projects. We're talking 1955. It's like 70 years ago, practically. Next year, it will be 70 years ago. And that file is still sealed after all this time. What is so important or so world-changing?
Yeah. Your mom reminds me of some of the people that I deal with, some people who have NDAs. And even though I have friendships with them, I would never ask them to break an NDA, and they wouldn't do it. No, they wouldn't share that private information with me. And because they're protecting national security. I still don't understand, and I know you're going to agree with this. Why can't they at least come out and tell us, that we're not alone in the universe? Tell us what we already know and confirm it, so people quit making fun of little kids in school because they talk about underground bases and because they talk about, aliens or whatever, they're doing so much damage to experiencers and to abductees that it's just not fair. And,
no, it's not fair.
The second time.
Yeah, it's not fair. And I understand that we need national security. Okay. I'm not like an anarchist that believes that we should just open all the files up, and share all of our secrets with our enemies and friends and God and whoever, Mm-hmm. We do need national security. We do need a military. Unfortunately, that's just human nature, that we are feisty and people are control freaks, and it's a dangerous world out there. But just the knowledge that we aren't alone and that some other civilization got past this uncomfortable spot that we're in right now, with all of our nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and doomsday clock getting closer and closer. I've got my little Salvador Dali clock there, the melting clock. But they say that, it's like a minute to doomsday scenario right now, and it seems to keep getting closer every year. And maybe if we knew that we aren't alone and that some other culture had gotten past that and survived to become a star-faring race, maybe we would behave better. Maybe if we knew that we were being watched, that we weren't all alone out here doing bad stuff in the dark, that it's all being observed. Maybe we'd be better human beings. I mean, Ronald Reagan, when he spoke to the United Nations at one point, he said, imagine how well we might get along with each other if we knew that there was a threat from outer space, that we would forget about borders and forget about our differences and maybe work together. And thinking about that, and I think that Reagan very well knew about this phenomenon. There's a couple of, we know that he saw a UFO while he was flying in a Lear jet once. He had the pilot divert the flight so he could kind of follow after it and see it. A flying saucer, apparently. And there's another story that that he had a visitation on the Pacific Coast Highway. That a being told him he was going to be president someday, and that it was important that he understood certain things. So I guess that Reagan knew. Also, his vice president was George Bush Sr., who was the head of the CIA. If anybody had been, talked into these programs and these SAP programs, it would have been him. So, and that was Reagan's spiel, was we would treat each other better with more care if we knew that we weren't alone. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a threat. It's an existential threat, I guess, that there's somebody out there that's of a higher technological prowess than we are at. But I think it's important knowledge. And that's why I do this. That's why I think probably why we do this. It's not going to be coming out of the television set, I don't think. I don't think there's any plans to do like a full-on disclosure with the president standing there. And, we've heard that he's going to do it. Gerald Ford said that he is going to do it. And they always clam up. They never do. I'm not sure if there's something uncomfortable in there that might scare us. I don't know. Maybe the old Anunnaki stories are true. Nibiru is coming around the corner, and we're, a slave race. I mean, there's a million different hypotheticals out there about it. And maybe they know something we don't know, but I think that people, the Earth is not the center of the universe. Galileo pointed his telescope and he saw the Galilean moons. They weren't called that back then, but he discovered them orbiting Jupiter. He pointed that out, and they were going to burn him at the stake for that knowledge. Right. They did put him on house arrest, and he had to recant and call his telescope, say his telescope was demon possessed.
You know what I say about that, Earl, though, and this is where you were talking about what your mom said about society not being able to handle it. But it's what I'm a pastor. I don't know if you know that or not. I'm not your.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't
God
have.
Bless you.
I'm not that kind of person. But like a traditional pastor, I'm very open-minded on things. But
good for you.
One of the things that I bring up to people is, the church rejected it, and they did, threaten to kill Galileo. But eventually they accepted it, and the church is still there. And so
yes.
I don't think it's a legitimate argument to say that if disclosure happens, that religion's going to just all of a sudden cease to exist. And I'm not a religion fan, believe it or not. I'm not. I'm a faith fan, personal faith and spirituality. But if we survive that, and that was a big deal because the Bible talks about the sun setting still. And that's where the big argument came from. But it wasn't the sun that stood still. It was in that storyline. It would have been the earth and stuff. So, like I'm saying, I just want to make sure that
Ezekiel's wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got all of the Renaissance paintings that people, you see the object there. Exactly. I think that Diana Pasulka, who's got connections with the Vatican library, I think she knows quite a bit. I think that some of it she's not allowed to share, but very interesting person, and certainly hasn't harmed her faith. I just did a podcast with one of my field investigators, who's a Christian, and he's doing a UFOs and spirituality podcast, and I felt very comfortable going on there. I didn't, trying to keep my own account short enough for your podcast. I didn't mention that when we went to see Star Wars in '77, I was actually taking pre-seminary classes. I was looking into becoming a pastor. So we have that in common
too. Let me tell you that Matt Laszlo too. Him and I are good friends now, and the same thing. We've both been on the wrong side of the tracks. We've been on our little God side of it now. But I just make sure you understand this podcast isn't about Christianity. It isn't about me being a pastor. It's about the phenomenon, and it's 100% about the phenomenon.
Well, I think it's a beautiful thing. And Jesus did say, in my Father's house, there's many rooms. And I think that's what he was talking about, that we aren't the only rodeo. We aren't his first rodeo. God is a creator. So are we. We just like children imitating their parents. We're poets and artists and musicians. And I'm a musician, a songwriter. I dabble in painting. I'm not very
like 3 CDs out, don't you, or something like that?
Very good, but that's kind of us imitating the parent. Oh yeah,
I said you have like 3 CDs out, don't you?
You can find me on YouTube. There's yes, I was in a acoustic duo called Piper Grey. Up until about 5 years ago, when aliens invaded my life so thoroughly, I just really didn't have time to do the gigging anymore, but I love it, and still comes up, and I plan on writing and doing music in the future, but I've become so busy doing this sort of thing, and also running, I have a 13-person team here. I want them to be open-minded, but I want them to also be skeptical. It's a tightrope walk. But if you don't do that tightrope walk, people will not accept your information that you put out there. I have to call a Mylar balloon flashing the sun in the breeze, a Mylar balloon flashing the sun in the breeze. And people don't want to hear that. I'll have people get angry that, well, but I'm sure it was a UFO. And I try to be really sweet about it, and I'll say, well, it's not like I'm God, and this is what I think enough for people, but still some people get just irate when you tell them that they saw the ISS space station.
A religious experience.
You saw a SpaceX launch.
Yes,
it is. People, it's kind of, I think, sort of like that for people. It's become that.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as a person who is a spiritual person, I try to delineate between the two. It's believing in UFOs is not going to save your soul. And they're two different things. But as a Christian, as a spiritual person, there's no dichotomy about believing in UFOs and knowing that there's other intelligences out there and being a good Christian. I mean, it comes down to loving God with all your heart, soul, strength, and might, and loving your neighbor as yourself. That's the new law that we were given.
What I preach.
Doesn't change any of that.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It's just more people to love.
Right, exactly. Cousins from another planet, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And we have to think about this. C.S. Lewis, the theologian, he thought about this a lot. He wrote a beautiful trilogy, a space trilogy. Paralandra is a science fiction book where we're like the snake in the garden. We're deposited on this planet where it's a pure and innocent civilization. And we wind up being like the temptation, the apple, the snake in the garden. And I kind of like the way Lewis looked at it. He said maybe the light year is God's quarantine to keep the rest of the universe safe from the likes of us. Yeah, that may be true. So be careful how you treat your, ETs.
Right.
I say treat everyone with love and respect as you would have yourself treated. So,
Like,
see, we went on a
yeah, I'm sorry. We can get back to the MUFON
tangent. I
stuff.
didn't even expect to go on,
Yeah.
Dale.
Yeah. When we talk about MUFON,
it's a part of it, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever your background. Hmm?
Yeah. Why don't we go back to MUFON? You can explain exactly how MUFON began. You said 1969, the same year my wife was born. I won't get us on another tangent. But anyway, let's talk about APRO and the influence of APRO and Walt Andrus and the development of the Midwest UFO network, and then how it became.
Sure. Well, it started as a Midwest UFO network. And yes, there were other organizations, APRO, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, of course. He 1969 Project Blue Book closed down. He went private. I happen to be very, very close friends with the Hynek brothers. They're my neighbors here, actually, about 5 miles away from me. And they're kind of carrying on their father's work in a modern way, which I find wonderful, delightful. How wonderful. He must be so proud of them, looking down at them. But the thing about MUFON, I think that is so beautiful, it became worldwide in 1969. Instead of being the Midwest UFO network, it was now the Mutual UFO net principles. A lot of them were devised for Project Blue Book by Dr. Hynek and by Dr. Jacques Vallée. If you look at our forms that we use for interviewing contactees, for instance, you'll notice Dr. Vallée's categorization system as well as Dr. Hynek's. So I think that MUFON really kind of took the foundation that was set by these great scientists, and we've carried it on, except in a contemporaneous way. We find that certain things we have to change over time. Like MUFON was very, very nuts and bolts. Even when I joined, it's pretty much a nuts and bolts organization. And but now there's more of an openness for personal contact because it happens. And the people that we hear stories from are police officers and military personnel and politicians and people that work in law enforcement and the pilots, the people that we look up to, that we put our lives into their hands. These are the people that are reporting contact episodes, whether visitations or abductions. A lot of the people don't like the word abduction, though, because they wind up actually caring for their visitors. But it kind of runs the gamut, it's not all, ET phone home, Reese's Pieces, there are dark elements to this as well. And I think that it's, again, wherever you have freedom of choice, you're going to have people that their motives aren't quite so good as others. And I think it works that way in phenomenology as well. They're not all here to help. And that, it helps having that spiritual discernment for myself, in those situations to kind of see what motives are. But MUFON, they've gone in that direction. I'm a member of the ERT, which was started by actually Bud Hopkins, which I didn't know, back in the 70s. When MUFON was writing their first field investigators handbook, they were coming across more and more cases since the Betty and Barney Hill became public knowledge. So they brought Bud Hopkins in to help write the field investigators handbook and to talk about, the people that had talked about abduction or visitation. And then lo and behold, my mentor, and I call her that, and she lets me call her that because she is, Kathleen Martin. She went in there with Dr. Don Dondery, Canadian psychologist, has written a wonderful book about ufology. They both went in and they set the groundwork for the ERT, which began as the experiencer research team. And being able to change with the times, we realized that we're more of a resource than research. Research certainly plays into it. We're always learning, and it's important to learn about our visitors. But it's almost like we became sort of social workers for people that had contact with our visitors that were going through ontological shock. And I'm very proud to be an executive member of that group of MUFON's ERT. And we are a resource. We were talking earlier about Yvonne Smith. You know, we have like a coterie, I guess, a little group of vetted hypnotherapists that are not part of MUFON, okay, because we can't, you know, imagine the legal snare that would be. You know,
Right.
I don't like what I found out, you know, they took DNA from me. So no, we can't go there, but we can, after speaking with an experiencer and interviewing them and getting to know them, if they have a burning desire to remember what happened to them, because people are given this gift of forgetfulness. It's not always a gift, and they want to retrieve what happened to them. So we do have that resource. People that have had visitations or abductions, they wind up bumping into this speed bump in life called ontological shock. Dr. John Mack, he's who coined that phrase. It's a form of PTSD. Whether you've had a seemingly benign or a seemingly malign contact experience, everybody bumps into that ontological shock because it kind of pulls your idea of reality right out from under you, and people feel like they don't have any tether to reality, and it can really disturb a person. So there are wonderful, wonderful support groups for experiencers. Opus that Les Velez runs is a wonderful resource. Yvonne Smith, who you mentioned, she has a wonderful a group that's a support group for contactees. And there's a few of them. And so we are able to send people in the right direction locally wherever they live, and a lot of stuff is done over the internet now, you know, with the Zoom conferencing type apps. You can have a meeting where people from all over the world can join in. You know, the only constraint is that we live in a round world. It might be 3 a.m. for somebody in Australia, but it is a resource that's out there. And people like Mary Rodwell, she lives in Australia. I believe that she may have a support group locally there for people. So, but that's an aspect of MUFON that I love, that I'm part of, and it's near and dear to my heart.
Well, one thing I wanted to hit, you said Bud Hopkins was the one who helped create the original field manual, field investigator manual. And I've read that book from beginning to end because there was a period of time that I wanted to be a field investigator. But I realized after reading the book and everything that it encompassed that I just didn't have the time or even the finances to be able to send off for the lab work and stuff like that. But it was a very, very impressive book, though, because it really was scientific. I mean, it really was done in a scientific way as far as every step of the way was a scientific approach. Exactly.
There's my copy, you know, and I refer to it. I mean, I've been doing this, you know, full-time ufologist now. I was working as a nurse up until about 4 years ago, and my doctor retired me. Unfortunate foot neuropathy that I have, but you know, I could no longer care for my patients. I did a lot of home care work, but
I thought we'd mention a few of the other people that are involved with MUFON, and Mark's been on the channel already, and just phenomenal person. He's your chief photo and video analyst, and so just tremendous person to have on your team there. Another one is Margie K. She's
Margie K, my colleague.
Yeah, she's been on the podcast as well, and she's the assistant state director for the state of Missouri. And then you'll recognize this guy real quick. Not the guy on the right either, but Dan. Ferrari,
Oh, I
Ferrari.
recognize him.
Yeah, he's the
Hmm.
one that basically told me that I ought to have you come on, and he offered to help, and so I'm very good. And I'm a MUFON member, so
I'm really glad.
I'm
And I was
hoping
going to
that you.
say, everybody out there, you don't have to become a field investigator. And for me, it's a 24/7 job. I'll have, you know, my son saw a UFO a year ago and called me at 3 a.m. But I mean, I'm always there to talk with these people. I take it very seriously, and you wind up becoming friends with your cases.
Right.
Um, I have my local MUFON meetings. I'm really proud of my team. So proud of my local group here. Kind of maybe 54 members, more or less, and but people will come to my MUFON meetings, and people are happy. They got their hands in the air, and one guy told me, it said, "Gosh, your meeting looks more like a Pentecostal church meeting than a UFO meeting." It's like, well, thank you. Well, we have happy people. We're a happy bunch. We all love each other. We all, my field investigators, we get together for game night. We play board games and stuff, and it's just really sweet and a wonderful. My life, I feel, is just so abundant and joyful, and MUFON has played into that. It's hasn't taken the place of church, but I will say that there's a similar kind of fellowship that happens when you're
And
around a
maybe
group of people that know that this is a real thing, that
and
this is
maybe
a
better
very real
because
phenomenon.
sometimes in the church setting you got people judging each other, and so I'm sure it's
Yeah.
probably better in the other group, and so you can be a little bit freer to talk about, because I mean, there's people in the church that know that I do this, and then there are others that I mention UFO to or alien to, and they just give me this blank
It's the
stare.
devil,
It's like,
yeah.
just quiet
Yeah.
real quick, and I just decided, you know what, I'll share it with the ones who are open. The ones that don't want to hear it, I'll give them space, because they're the ones going to have the ontological shock. And so
Yep.
let's
Yep.
if you don't mind, I'd love to go ahead and just read this and then ask you about
Sure.
some of your cases. I got this from the McMinnville advertisement. Now, what I was there and I saw you. We were in that small room with
Oh,
Travis Walton, and it was crowded
sure.
and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Was that 23 or was that 21? Because I know you were
That
there
was
as a teenager.
2023. That was last year. And I
Okay.
love the McMinnville UFO Fest. How much
Oh
fun
yeah.
was that? My
I
goodness.
live I live like an hour and a half away. So it's the closest thing
My
I've done
wife
as
and I
far
are
as
even
anything.
talking about retiring there, possibly.
Yeah. I love it.
McMinnville is a little expensive, but some of the
Yeah.
outlying areas aren't quite so, extraordinarily expensive to live in. And well, we're talking about it. We really we loved McMinnville. We loved the whole festival, the parade, and my wife was thrilled that there were a lot of wineries in the area too.
Oh, there's tons of
Yeah, we
those.
do enjoy doing the wine tasting thing. So
That's a
might
big
be
thing in
neighbors
Oregon.
at some point here, Dale.
Yeah, that's good. One thing I warn you
Yep.
about is, like,
Yep.
don't let the summers deceive you. We get a lot of rain,
Mm.
and a lot of people have trouble with that
Oh.
because of depression and stuff like that. But the reason Oregon looks so beautiful for 3 or 4 months during the summer is because of all that rain. And there's really,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's any place more beautiful than Oregon during the summer. But anyway, let me go ahead and read this.
It's
This is
gorgeous.
from the
So
McMinnville.
beautiful.
It
And
says,
particularly that whole area.
absolutely. I used to cruise out there when I was a teenager. There was take our hot rods out there and go cruise around McMinnville. The other one was to go up to 82nd, 182nd in Portland. So a lot of memories there for me. Let me go ahead and read this though. Earl Grey Anderson is the Mutual UFO Network State Director of Southern California, Chief Field Investigator, member of MUFON's STAR Team, and Executive Committee member of MUFON's ERT Experiencer Resource Team. In his work with MUFON, Anderson has closed a plethora of high strangeness cases, one of which was presented in MUFON's Cases of the Year at the 2021 symposium. And so that's kind of the transition I wanted to go into now. And just, I can only imagine as long as you've done this, and the fact that you are like, you know, a STAR team member, remind us exactly what the STAR team does real quick before we go into your cases.
Sure. Well, that's MUFON's rapid response team. It was started back, I think maybe 2015 or so, when we were kind of doing some work with Robert Bigelow's group.
Rapid response to what, though? What is
it's
that?
for, okay, what we respond to is if there is a UFO landing, if there is a crash, and STAR team members are, you have to be available to go.
Right.
And recently, MUFON has made all state directors STAR team members, actually, because you have to be a STAR team member in order to assign somebody a STAR team case. And that's what we do, is assign the cases, oftentimes working hand in hand with the field investigators ourselves. You know, you want feet on the ground, you want to use scientific principles, and you're taught how to do things, do a grid like you would do, you know, with a little flag it off and have the twine, roping it off so people aren't walking over your evidence. A good example would be Lonnie Zamora's sighting that happened in New Mexico. The police happened to be there, but there were beings that were seen walking around this craft, and the craft left. When the way that it took off, it initially had flames coming from it, and then it went back to the usual, apparently electromagnetic principle that they use to evade gravity. But there was a lot of evidence there. Now, I know that Dr. J. Allen Hynek got out there, and very quickly they roped off the area. They did take, they took plaster impressions of the footsteps. They took samples of where the grass and the shrubbery had been burnt in the ground itself. And that's the kind of, or you know, I mean, if you get your own DNA in there, or you even like sometimes a fingerprint on something is going to ruin your evidence. Mm-hmm. So we're taught how to deal with that. We're taught how to use a tri-field meter, for instance, to find unnatural electromagnetic fields. Geiger counters, we all have one. It makes my wife mad. She'll make a meatloaf and I'm checking it out with a Geiger counter. You know, it's a joke, honey. I'm not really, you know, I don't think you're trying to irradiate the meatloaf, but you know, you wind up inevitable. Once you get one, you're checking the microwave and check it. Oh man, the cell phone, forget it. You know, you check the cell phone with a Geiger counter, it's going way up, especially for charging it. But you know, knowing how to use this in the field, you know, I had one case that was in Azusa here, and this was I was a STAR team member at that point. It was the first case I went out on. My old state director still insists it was not a STAR team case, Earl, but I did go to collect evidence, theodolite photos of where the UFO is seen. I actually knocked on doors, left business cards with neighbors. I was ready to go and take an arboreal ladder. This UFO was seen hovering over this man's tree in his front yard. And it was an old, tall tree. And I was going to need a really tall, like a fireman's ladder to do it. And I had my Geiger counter all set. I was going to do this, and I knocked on the door to get permission from the gentleman. And he was one of these guys who was like, "Get off of my lawn."
Oh my goodness.
We don't believe in that stuff here, you know. And then he waved his Bible at me too. I could have waved mine back at him, I guess, but he was very uncomfortable. You know, he didn't want any aliens on his property. So, you know, there haven't been a whole lot of STAR team cases to go out on, but that's the thing. You have to be ready to go. You have to be ready to go and do it. I've got a guy up in Central California. He's got a beautiful kit all set up with everything, you know, gathered together. I'm a little less organized than him, but, you know, you want paper bags, not plastic, but you want paper bags to gather evidence in. You want to have an ultraviolet light to be able to check for certain things that could be left in say, an abduction case. Sometimes you'll get fingerprints, handprints, the natural oil from our visitors, hands and stuff will show up. So you need to have all these tools and know how to use them and know how to use them properly. And that's pretty much what the STAR team does. I know that Robert Spearing, our director of international investigations, but he does a lot of stuff. Bob is all over the place in MUFON. Love the guy. We both are similar. We look for repeating patterns from case to case.
Very important.
And they recently found they found a soil sample, the 1960s case, where a small UFO had gone onto this farm property and left a ring on the ground that was not water soluble. It repelled water. It glowed in the dark. The mother got too close to it. She got rashes all over her, terrible rashes all over her hands. Well, we found that sample recently, way in the archives at MUFON. The Hainer that we have, there is a Hainer 1, although it's not 1. I forget the number of the Hainer. But MUFON does have that Hainer. And so back when we got this sample, we did not have the lab set up to do all the investigation on it. Now we do. So, this is kind of the beauty of, but if you have to know how to collect those samples and not like ruin the sample by, even breathing on it, can cause changes in the chemistry of something. So that's pretty much what the STAR team does. And it's good. It's good stuff and good methodology and good science is what it is too.
I've got my tri-field meter. That's what I got for my Father's Day gift. So I've got my first piece of equipment to be a field investigator. I just got to wait till I retire.
Cool.
Go ahead and tell us about the case that was part of the 2021. That was
just don't check the meatloaf. You might make your wife mad.
I might, but she's the one who bought it for me, though.
Sure. Wonderful case. Well, she brought it on herself. If you start checking the meatloaf, refrigerator,
well.
microwave,
all I got to say, I'm married well.
Me too. My wife, she thinks she feels like she lives at a UFO conference. She went with me to Contact in the Desert. I spoke there this year, right? Wonderful, kind of a festival like McMinnville, but in the desert, the arid version. She went to that. That was a week. And then the symposium was coming up, and I asked her, do you want to go to the Texas symposium? And she said, I just got back from the Contact in the Desert. I feel like I live with an alien already. I feel like I live at a UFO conference. So you get to do Texas on your own this time. But I love her so much. She has to put up with a lot, phone calls will sometimes come in very late at night. It was her birthday, and I had a phone call come in from Louisiana, and I had to take it, with somebody having an experience, that had them before. And I love being there for people. I love being there. They become my friends. That's the thing, you care about them. It's not just some case number. They're people,
it's kind of like having
personalities.
People on my podcast. We become friends, with a lot of them. Mario Woods and I are good friends. Matt Laszlo and I are good friends, and the list just goes on and on. Steve Bassett and I are good friends now. He's been on my podcast.
Steve's a great guy.
Yeah, I've got him lined up already for when the next hearing's over. I've got him and Matt Laszlo line up to come on the podcast.
Fantastic.
We're going to hit it right after the hearing's over.
Beautiful. I need to get him after you got him, but you got him first.
Yeah.
Steve is a dear friend. We were also members of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, which is a wonderful group.
If you see my picture on it, I just, Dan gave me an invitation. So if you see my picture, it's like from 15 years ago. I didn't have the mustache or goatee or anything. And I swear I look older in that picture than I do today. You can tell me if I do or not.
Okay, well, I'll look for you, Dale. Well, it's a wonderful group, and we have a few MUFON, more than a few MUFON members in there. Ron James is a member, but it's wonderful. It's creators, people that are in Hollywood and film, television, radio, and podcasting, and then ufologists. I'm a board of directors member. I feel really honored to be part of that as well. Again, my wife feels like she lives with an alien. It's just ongoing, but she's so wonderful. And I mean, she's had an experience too. I mean, she kind of blamed me for it at first, and she's probably correct. I don't know if she would have been targeted if she wasn't married to me, but that's the nature of this phenomena. You poke at it, it kind of pokes back. It's interactive. It's not some dead thing on a microscope slide.
It's one thing when you have unexperience, and it's another thing when you have experience after experience after. It can become overwhelming.
Yes,
at some point.
Well,
I think,
and that'll lead back to the case you wanted me to talk about from 2021. I had the case report come in, and I took it for myself. It was an ERT case as well as a sighting report. And what happened in the sighting, the mother is a psychologist. I can't give you guys much information about the people involved because it could ruin their careers. Right. The husband is a medical doctor. The wife is a psychologist, and they actually have a mental health service that they offer their community. So just very bright people, and not not the type of people that would make up some crazy story. But she was driving home with her adult son. I guess he was 19 years old at the time. So there were 3 witnesses to this whole event. And she's driving home, and they see this V-shaped object that was hovering over a schoolyard. She's looking at it. He's looking at it. They're trying to figure out what it is. And the closer that they got, things became very strange. Sounds became muffled around them. External sounds outside of their car you couldn't hear. Time seemed strangely slowed down. Now the mom is driving. It was sort of like my mom trying to drive, telling me like trying to drive, but they were experiencing what they call the Oz effect, which is sort of like Dorothy when she opens up the door and you see Oz and all the colors and everything changes, and that's the Oz effect. The British ufologist Jenny Randall is who coined that term. And we see the Oz effect happen in experiencer accounts, close encounters with UFOs. It's the same thing. Something happens to the environment. Something happens to time. Something happens to your perceptions. And there's a psychological element. She and her son, they're not talking about what they're seeing. They're looking at it. They slow the car down as they're driving by, and they watch this V-shaped object turn to its side, and the lights started flashing. When the lights started flashing, it seemed to put them both into sort of a hypnagogic state where they were highly susceptible to the influence of this other intelligence, to where their thoughts were kind of the intelligence's thoughts. So they're watching this V-shaped object with the lights blinking. It goes back to its original position where the lights are flashing straight down. They watched it turn around, and it flew treetop level right over the neighborhood, away from the school. They watched this thing go off into the vanishing point. Now the mom and her son, she's still driving home, and they go into the driveway. And when they get in the driveway, it's about maybe 10 minutes after the sighting, the son finally speaks up. He said, "Did you see what I saw? What was that?" And the main witness said, "Well, I think we both know what we saw. That was a UFO. Well, we don't have anything that does that sort of thing. It was too large to be and metallic looking to be a lighter than air craft that we would have built." But they thought they had just seen a UFO. But a strange thing began happening. At night, the husband would become paralyzed. He would be awake, and this is a medical doctor, long career, a general practitioner, to where he would become paralyzed in bed and the wife would be taken. Now, he saw beings at a couple of different times. He said that they looked almost like, they looked like the gray aliens that you see with the black eyes, but they also saw what looked like a praying mantis type being, that they were telepathic, that they would communicate with both himself and his wife. They would take his wife and then they would bring her back, not always leaving her in the same room. Sometimes he would find her in the kitchen. He would finally be able to move again. The paralysis would be stopped, apparently just to keep, so he wouldn't, get in their way and try to stop what they were doing. There was one photograph that he took of the back of his wife's neck that had 2 puncture marks. Her clothes would be put back on wrong, like the buttons wouldn't be done right. At one point, her undergarments, it looked like they had been cut off with some kind of a laser type thing. It was it was just a very sharp, not like a suture or scissors or anything. It was weird. And this kept happening. They kept taking her, and she, believed that they took her DNA, possibly took her ovum on one occasion, which is kind of a regular thing. We hear that a lot. Started out where she was really scared. The more we spoke, the more we talked. There's catharsis in speaking about this thing. There's catharsis and peace when you can talk with somebody and they're not judging you. They're not ridiculing you, when they know that this is real. And she was able to wrap her head around this phenomenon. Apparently, she still gets taken. I had her keep a diary and to date it, time it. And, it started out, this whole thing started out about 4 years ago, and it continues on to today, but they take her less often now. Might happen once a year, twice a year. She doesn't feel afraid of her entities. She believes that perhaps they're taking her DNA in case humanity destroys itself. Maybe they'll replant us again and try over. Perhaps it's for what we hear about a hybridization program, which I think is a very good possibility, that there are possibly human ET hybrids that have been created. Maybe as leaders and things like that, we are so violent and we just can't seem to stop ourselves trying to create a less violent human that's more survivable. There's a lot of hypotheticals with this, and I'm not going to tell you what I think for sure, because I don't know for sure. But it's not all malevolent. It's not really different than how we would treat, say, a pride of lions if we were trying to understand how lions live. You hover over them in a helicopter, you hit them with a tranquilizer dart, you get DNA, blood. If they're sick, you give them antibiotics, and you track them. You put a little tracker on them. A year goes by, and you do it all over again. If lions could speak, they might say something to us very similar to what we hear from abductees. So, but anyway, this case, it's ongoing. They usually are. And this one, there was so much evidence, the level of respect that the 3 witnesses have. It's either, these people have either had a mental breakdown that's ongoing, these folks that actually have a mental health wellness group that they, run themselves, or they're lying. Well, they haven't made any money off of this. They have never gone public. God forbid. I can't tell you the names involved. They're in the chart, but they're, it's anonymous for everybody except for, if you're a state director of MUFON or something. So anyhow, that was his of 2021, and I'm very proud of that case. I've have so many cases like that, though. I could tell you. I mean, I have TSA agents that have similar stories. Often starts in childhood, continues on into adulthood. I've got military pilots, a full flight crew that were on their way to Hawaii from Japan that put in a UFO report where they saw these three flying saucers, 200 feet across each, glinting in the sun. They went into a triangular holding pattern and just sat there. This was right at the continental date line. It was still dark out. You could see the stars. The sun was just slow, like a little fingernail of light, at the edge of the earth. And they watched these three flying saucers go into a triangular holding pattern, hang there just long enough to say hello. Then they all shut down at the same time and were gone past the limb of the earth. Now I've got that whole flight crew. I've got their, they signed the flight log. Actually drew a little picture of the three saucers on the flight log. I have a photograph of that. If you go to my website for my local group, it's SoCal MUFON, SoCalMUFON.com. If you go and you look, like you have like the different pages you can go to, I write a blog there, and I have the full case. If you want to look it up, it's there on SoCalMUFON.com.
A little bit. It's not exact, but it reminds me of the famous one, the cargo Japanese airliner that saw whatever is like size of 3 football fields. Wasn't that over Alaska or somewhere like that? I think that one was, but it just reminded me of it.
Yep. That was 1985, I think. Yeah, I actually mentioned that case in the piece that I wrote about it. I think the good news is right now is that a lot of the airlines, have sort of loosened the rules that they used to be. I mean, the Japanese crew you're talking about, and yeah, that UFO is like the size of 3 aircraft carriers put on top of each other. Right. Followed them ominously. It was a cargo plane carrying a shipment of wine to Alaska, and a JAL flight. And the pilot came forward, the whole crew did, and guess what? They found themselves flying desks ever after. They never got another flight. They grounded them. And that's the way that people were treated. And apparently the rules have been loosened now. So the gentleman that came forward with this case I just told you about that was on the way to Hawaii, he said that the only reason why he came forward with his account is, he said, they've loosened the rules now. I don't think they're going to ground me, so I'm going to tell my story. And he's gone on television. He's going out there being very vocal about it. A lot of evidence, as much as you could have with this case. And but I got that case initially. Very proud of that one.
So off of that, let me ask you, I got a couple questions. I want to talk about the generational stuff, but before we do that, do you think, from what, because you're out on the front lines and you've been at it for quite a while now, do you think that the stigma is starting to die out, or is it kind of just being withheld for a period of time and it'll come back?
I think that it's died down. The news organizations seem to take it more seriously than they used to, but I still see, it was used against, who was it? Tim Burchett recently to bash his name on one news program. This guy also believes in UFOs. Come on. It's still, there's a ridicule factor. I hope that we can get rid of it, but as long as we have people like Mick West and some of the idiots that have taken, Philip Klass's place. The original guy was Philip Klass, who Stanton Friedman, the great, ufologist Stanton Friedman, who we lost a few years ago. God bless you, Stan. He called him Klass the ass because that's what he was. After Phil Klass passed away, we found out that he was actually in the employ of the CIA. He was an official debunker, even though he wasn't telling anybody that. So I think that the gatekeepers of all this information, it's who my mom used to work for, the military industrial complex. They're the guys that have the materials. They're the guys that have the accounts, and they don't want to let go of that. Uh, we were talking about the transparency bill. Chuck Schumer's transparency UAP transparency bill. The guys that rendered that bill toothless were too to their when they do their oh, I can't say it, getting old. But their two greatest political donors were those guys that David Grush mentions, Lockheed, Northrop, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the gatekeepers, and I think that they shouldn't be the gatekeepers. I think that we have better ambassadors to the stars than the guys that run the military, and that they have a vested interest in us continuing to fight wars, to continue having nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and to have the atomic doomsday clock a minute to midnight. That's their bread and butter, and they know what side of the bread it's buttered on, and they keep on tearing this out of the grasp of the public, and I don't foresee any time that they're going to stop. So disclosure, I believe, is up to us. Steve Bassett, he'll say differently, and I love Steve, and I hope that he is successful in his endeavor. I hope we're able to take this out of their grasp and put it into better gatekeepers' hands. But right now, it's the same guys as it ever was, same as it ever was. That Talking Head song, same as it ever was.
I think you're right, and I think Steve's right. I don't think we should rely on one way. We should have multiple ways to try to get to disclosure. I did want to talk to you real quick, though, about because I've studied a little bit on this. You mentioned it seems to be generational. That it appears that they had made contact with their mother. They made contact with you. I see that. The other thing is you mentioned something about age 5. Isn't that the common age for a lot of people to have first contact?
5, 7. Yeah, 7. We see 7-year-olds quite often. My TSA agent, who I can't mention his name because he's still a TSA agent, head of the TSA in one big airport, but he his visitations began when he was 7 years old, and the parents would see light coming from under his door. They blamed it on night terrors, is what they called it. They thought he was having nightmares, but he would be screaming and would be under the bed. They would paralyze him at age 7. They would float in these machines. One looked almost like the droid that was in The Empire Strikes Back that they shoot over the snow, had the little things dangling from beneath it, and was taking blood from him, taking DNA, I guess, samples of this and that. And then they would leave, and the kid was having trouble sleeping, and the parents took him to psychologists and child psychologists and the whole deal. But they finally realized that this was actually something that was happening to him. Now, he was adopted, and his birth father lived in Brazil. His actual father passed away some years ago, but my friend went and he found out who his birth uncle was. So he flew out to South America. He met with the man, and he was asking him, well, did my father have anything unusual happen to him when he was a kid? Did he mention like alien life forms? He felt embarrassed asking. And his uncle is shocked. And his uncle said, and my friend told his account from childhood to his uncle, and his uncle said, your father went through the same thing. The sad thing is that they committed your father. They put him into a mental institution because in Brazil, they'd never heard of such a thing. You're talking about aliens coming in the middle of the night and taking you to a flying saucer. They would think that confirmation for my friend. We call him Tony is the name we finally came up with for him. I can't use his real name, but he to this day I stay in touch with him. He's started to show signs. She's a teenager, and we believe that she's probably being taken now as well. So you've got the father, we've got the son, and now we've got the son's daughter. So that's 3 generations. Same thing in Kathleen Marden's family. Betty and Barney Hill. But it sort of opened up this door to where Kathleen's mother had visitations. Kathleen herself has been taken. She wrote about it in her new book, Forbidden Knowledge, which is a fantastic book, very, very personal. And I love Kathleen. I mean, she is who, I had my own visitation 9 years ago, and it completely changed everything. I felt ontological shock. I don't want to belabor and tell the whole story to you, but I was trying like a CE5 meditation where you asked ETs to come, but it wasn't good enough for me to just see a little light in the sky. I said, I want to meet you. And I tried this for a couple of weeks. I'd get into a meditative state and I would put that message out there. Now, I will say, if you do anything like that, maybe you shouldn't do it, first of all. But if you do, maybe you should designate, I want benevolent ETs. I don't want to have, to be paralyzed. I don't want to have blood taken. I just want to meet you. That would be the way if I had done this and I had known more, but I was naive. I just opened the door to this stuff. I'd been a field investigator for about 7 months. I think at that point had maybe 30 cases under my belt. I don't think I had any unknowns yet. It'd been, Mylar balloons and Goodyear blimp and stuff like that. But I went upstairs one night in our little bungalow bedroom that we had in Burbank. Is not a rural area. It's the heart of the city there in Burbank. It's the real Hollywood. That's where my wife works, Burbank Studios. And I was going to sleep. I was sort of on my elbows. I thought about it. It was kind of like my mom when she had her visitation thing when she was 16 years old. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I wasn't asleep yet. Our room started filling with this blue light. And at first it puzzled me. There was no source for this light. But the brighter it got, the calmer I got. I felt almost narcoticized, or like they put me into a semi-hypnotic state. We had a cricket problem in the rafters. You couldn't hear crickets. You couldn't hear external sounds outside of the house. Time seemed slowed down, very weird. And I felt very, very peaceful. And there was this area of light in front of our bed that was swirling, and it opened up from the center. I couldn't move a muscle. And I'm an old nurse. I used to take care of quadriplegics. To become a quadriplegic would scare the hell out of me. But for some reason, it wasn't worrying me. They run the narrative. That's what I've found. Right. And you think that they're your thoughts, but they aren't necessarily your thoughts. This hole opened up in the middle of the air, and these beings came through, and they took blood, a lot of blood, and it felt like maybe life energy or something, or maybe it was just lots of blood. I was afraid when all that was going on. I was trying to communicate. There was no communication coming back to me. And I started rebuking them in the name of Jesus in my mind. They were not leaving. In the past, if there was something that I felt was evil, that would always work. It would stop everything in its tracks. Well, no, they kept on going like a surgical team, and they left. They left backwards, like they were pulled back through that hole in the air.
Portal almost
closed back up. I still couldn't move. At this point, I was scared to death. I'm glad I used the bathroom before this happened. And that was my experience. When I could move, I started yelling and screaming. It was about 3 a.m. or so. My wife was not pleased at all. You know, you joined this crazy UFO group. Is this the kind of thing I have to look forward to? 2 nights later, she went through the exact same thing.
Oh, wow.
I'm paralyzed. I wake up finally. She's shaking me, but I was out to the world. And she's pacing by the bed going, my God, you need to tell your little friends that they need to leave us alone. I'm not going to use the word on your show. I didn't sign up for this stuff. 2 nights after that, God's spotlight was on our backyard. Woke me up, woke Lisa up as well. Neither of us were paralyzed. We both went to the window, drew up the blinds, and it was as though this great spotlight was shining. You could see every little branch just so brightly. The shadows were almost like you cut the little black paper silhouettes that you'll see sometimes. You know, they do that at Disneyland. They'll do your silhouette. It was that sharp and that delineated, the shadows from every branch, every leaf on the ground. And we had a telepathic moment. We were told what was technically a lie. We were told both at the same time, Lisa and myself, we're looking at each other. You know, she's on this side of the window, I'm over here. Don't worry, it's just the nature's porch light. It's the neighbor's porch light. The neighbor's porch light. And we laughed so hard and we spoke in unison. That is no porch light.
Nice try.
I know. So this is my own, and what, I drove 4 hours to go see my state director at the time, and he was pretty nuts and bolts about this. And I think he may have believed me, but he said, you're going to find ridicule if you talk about this. I don't think MUFON is going to be happy about it if you talk about it. I suggest you zip your lip and keep this to yourself. Mm. And I drove home. I felt pretty... I didn't know where to go and who to talk with.
That'd be tough.
And I spoke with Kathleen Martin. We met for lunch. And there was just something about having that person, that intelligent person who knew that this was a reality, listen to my account. And she had some answers for me. She said, they're not all good guys. You maybe made a mistake there when you asked any old alien to come and, take you. Because I did say that, I sent that out there. If abducting me and taking my DNA as a price of the ticket, go for it, But I didn't think it was going to work. I was pretty flippant about it when I did it. But I found out, you poke at this phenomena, it pokes back. It's an interactive phenomena. And that's the way it is. Ooh, I just noticed my computer needs to be plugged in here.
Battery going dead on it. Well,
hold on one second.
Earl, one thing I really appreciate that you've done, and I talked to somebody, it's in confidence as well, but they've gone through some tremendous experiences, and somebody within the X community was going behind their back saying that they had a demon.
Oh.
And so they got victimized a second time. When I was in Roswell this year, this is my straight out of Roswell shirt. I ran into a Christian there, and it was so disappointing because I'm of the opinion I don't think we should spiritualize this until we know what it is.
Yeah.
It's not to deny people's spiritual experiences or anything like that, but I think just until we know what it is. And I mentioned that to him, and he was kind of combative with me on it, and because I said, well, we don't know what it is. Just one of the possibilities is it might be a different species from other planets. And he first word was, show me that in the Bible. And he's one of those guys, show me that in the Bible. And so I said, well, the Bible talks about God creating the heavens and the earth, and the heavens would include planets and other things. And then he came back and he used the Jesus name thing on me. And it's like, yeah, I got 100 cases where they used the name of Jesus and then they left. And
no, that's not true.
I said, there's 100 cases where people have done that and it didn't happen. And then he started getting on me about, Revelation. He said, well, Revelation says you're not supposed to take or add anything to the Bible. And I said, well, John also says in Revelation that if you took everything Jesus did while he was on earth and you tried to put it in books, there probably wouldn't be enough libraries in the world to contain a meaning that not everything Jesus did on earth is written down. And in the same factor, not everything about God is in the Bible. And my struggle with people like that is they worship the Bible instead of the God of the Bible. And so I
agree.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact, because I got friends on both sides of the spectrum. Whoops, looks like I lost my camera for some reason.
Uh-oh. We're bumping into problems right at the end of this thing.
Yeah, that's really
my
strange.
computer almost, if I had not plugged in when I did, I would have just disappeared.
It went to virtual all by itself.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it went to virtual all by itself.
I wind up bumping into problems trying to do podcasts, by the way, even my own. And it's not the first time where I've had people say there's something weird going on with our computer system, the hiccuping and seems like everything is constantly, I've cut in and out. And, I don't know. Maybe I'm being paranoid.
Weird, I want you to notice I was bouncing before. I'm not bouncing anymore. So I don't have a clue what was going on. But by it doing that and bringing me back, I mean, I've got the best picture I've had all day.
Oh, good. There you go.
So that I wasn't bouncing and everything. But anyway, I want to tell you, Earl, how much I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Dave.
Thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I like I said, I saw you in 23 at McMinnville. I met Kathleen Martin in 2021 when I was there.
I love her. She's so wonderful.
I've always had a lot of respect. And then knowing that you are state director for Southern California and your involvement with MUFON and the STAR team and the ERT team, experiencer resource team. I just I had to get that. It took me a second, but
anyway, people still call it the research team, and we do that. We do research. That is a part of it, but that's not for us. That's not our main motive. We're there to help people, which was interesting. When I did Ancient Aliens, I was telling them about the ERT. And the producer of Ancient Aliens was shocked. He said, I thought MUFON was just about data collection. And I didn't know that MUFON had a heart. And I said, yes, we have a heart. There's compassion. And that's, the ERT. Now, you have to walk that tightrope. I mean, you still have to do, I'll have cases come in where I think that, perhaps it is a psychological issue that the person has. Or, sadly, we'll have people hoax, people are under the false impression that there's money somewhere in this, and there's not. I'm like a top tier speaker, I guess now. I'm speaking at the main conferences and such, and I kind of break even. Right. I really do. I mean, I teach a class in ufology at Otis College here by LAX, and I do get paid for that. Thank God. There's a little revenue that comes in through that. But ufology in general, Ancient Aliens, if you're lucky, they'll pay your plane ticket and your hotel, and they'll give you, a couple $300. That's not getting rich. No. There's not money in ufology.
That's one of the myths out there about grifters and stuff.
If you're Giorgio, I guess Giorgio does pretty well. If you have your own TV show, I guess you're doing a little better. But, we do this for the love of it. Yeah, and MUFON is a volunteer organization.
Yeah, exactly. But the guy from Counting Cars, I found out in one of the videos last night, the guy's making $100,000 per episode before he decided to retire. $100,000 per episode. So don't complain about guys making a few dollars and it's like Yvonne said. She said, a lot of the people who, whether you want to use the word experiencer or abductee, who feel like they need to write a book. It's just something. But she's very clear. Don't think you're going to get rich, or when you write a book and publish it, because you're not, unless your name's Stephen King.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, anyway, if anybody out there in listener land, if anything that we've been talking about hit home for you, you can go to MUFON.com, MUFON.com. If you've seen a UFO and you want to report it, we're the guys you want to tell that too. We'll take you seriously and we will investigate that case. And you'll see a button that will link you to, report a UFO. It'll take you to the appropriate document. And, they'll want to know the time, place, name. You can go anonymous. That is an option there. There's also report an entity or an abduction. Thank goodness. That's like a new button that they put there a couple of years ago. And that will take you directly to the ERT questionnaire, where we'll ask you 30 questions. You can write your narrative in there. And if there's a UFO involved, you can do a regular case report. And we will investigate the UFO for you, and we can help you. Somebody like myself, we have about 80 members in the ERT, and we can help you get past that ontological shock. We deal with that constantly. I got past my ontological shock. I love my entities. It may have started in a scary way, but now, as time has gone on, they leave you with gifts. Whether it seems like it was malign or benign, it's always the same. Your compassion is expanded. Synchronicities happen in my life, which are like little miracles, just every single day. It's uncanny. I'll be thinking of a writer and he'll be in front of me at the grocery store. I want to get a hold of some TV producer or something, and lo and behold, there's an email from them. This kind of thing. Or I'm thinking about, Christianity and UFOs, and boom, somebody like Dale will come along. It's always the right person, the right time, the right thing. And that is a gift that you get. It didn't happen before. So there's a beauty in there, but you have to get past the fear. And what you put in there is what you get. You reap what you sow in life. And it's the same thing with this phenomenon. If you're fear-based, if you're angry, if you feel like it's an invasion, that get past that. People, if they don't, deal with it, they'll go to drugs or alcohol or just become, immersed in anger. And but the ERT and the people that work with us, we're familiar with all of these aspects of this phenomenon, and we can help you. So, but anyway, that's where you go, MUFON.com. If you're interested in what I do in my local team in Los Angeles and Southern California here, that's SoCalMUFON.com. And that's our little mini website. And we get some of the greatest speakers in the world. Steve Bassett, that you're just talking about, the Hynek brothers, Robert Salas, we were talking about, in the nuclear capsule. They've all spoken to my group, and it's just a wonderful, joyous group, and I'm so proud of them and my field investigator team. And you can see everybody's bios on the move, SoCal MUFON. So that's what I would kind of leave you guys with, and there you go.
I appreciate it, Earl, and we'll close it out just a little bit. I just got done reading Communion, or listening to it twice, and then UFO of God twice, and there's just so
Chris
many
Bledsoe,
different stories. Yeah, exactly. And there's so many stories where it's hostile and they're angry and stuff, but eventually, like with Whitley, I mean, it becomes a relationship. That's why he wrote a book called Communion. Now, I'm not going to say that's true in every case, because I know some other people that have had different experiences, and I think it's a mistake to go one way or the other, because it seems to be, we experience both,
right
like
the
they're
middle.
good humans and they're bad humans. Maybe there's, from within one species, there's good and bad, or maybe there's this type of species is good and this one tends to be bad or evil or whatever. So, but you have
if you're a bull, humans are the most evil creatures on the planet Earth. It's but I mean, it's so much of it is perspective. And yes, but I think that when you have a dialogue and there's understanding, it becomes different, and there's a beauty in there, just like there's beauty in everything if you look for it. But if you're looking for darkness and horror and the fear factor, you know, you're going to get a reflection of yourself, but it's just going to be amplified. That's the way it works. That's the way a lot of things work, though.
You know,
You
Dr.
know,
Lynn
it's.
Katai. You know, Dr.
Oh
Lynn
yeah,
Katai.
sure. I love. Yeah, Lynn is a
And she
dear
was on, and
friend.
she said basically the same thing that you did. That was her perspective as well.
Yeah.
Well, I know you're probably worn out. I'd like to talk to you for a minute after the podcast is over.
Sure.
You've got a couple minutes, but let me go ahead and close it out this way, just by asking everyone that's watching, if you haven't subscribed already, let me encourage you to go ahead and subscribe. I've been so blessed, and I don't know why, I'll be honest with you, but just incredible guest. If you go and look at my podcast and my channel, you're going to see the quality of guests I've had have been phenomenal, just like Earl. And so if you haven't done it already, go ahead and subscribe. Also, you can help the channel out by sharing the videos and liking. That'll help in the YouTube rankings. And so thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you, Earl, for being on. And everyone, you have a good day.